coffee this morning, the Philippines has yet to recover from the damage wrought by Typhoon Yolanda last year. Given the country's vulnerability to powerful storms, a new study shows efforts must be ramped up to avert disasters. Take a look.
Acts of nature often trailed by devastating effects. Around the globe, hydrometeorological events have notably gone up during the past 4 decades, with about half of them hitting countries in this region, including the Philippines. A country located in the Pacific Ocean, the breeding ground of much tropical cyclone activity. But climate change experts reveal, conscious as we may be about the threats, disaster preparedness and environmental sustainability remain low among government's priorities. Experts believe countries in Asia and the Pacific should ramp up preventive measures to avert disasters. A new study from Indepedent Evaluation at the Asian Development Bank cites 3 major risks that come with disasters. But the study says natural disasters are still treated as one-off acts of nature rather than the result of climatic factors influenced by human activity.
All right, joining us in the studio this morning, Vinod Thomas, Director General of Independent Evaluation at the Asian Development Bank. Good morning to you. I know the ADB came out with a study linking climate change to many factors that we are experiencing today. Okay, first I want you to explain, what is an independent evaluation within the Asian Development Bank?
Thank you very much, Karen. Magandang umaga. Independent evaluation is something all organizations should strive to have. That is a voice that looks at the real effects on the ground of the projects that that organization like ADB does, but with an independent eye. So we, in this case, report to the board of directors and not to the management, and so we can have a certain degree of distance in terms of the objectivity of the studies, but also engagement with operations so that we are saying things that are realistic.
Yes.
So every project that, for example, the Asian Development Bank does, independent evaluations provides an assessment when that project is completed. So in the end, we can say, well, did the beneficiaries actually benefit? And to what extent?
Very good,
This is a very good practice, but of course, it has to be done better and better. The quality has to be
So are you like the Commission on Audit?
It is analogous. The difference here, of course, is that in the case of audit, you make sure that the procedures are followed by world standards. In this case, we asked the question, did the beneficiaries get the benefits? Whether it's a loan for Yolanda or a loan for the conditional cash transfers for the Philippines.
Oh, really?
Having spent all the money, well, how was the effect? How was the impact? And that could give us lessons to do these things better going forward. So it's a very important function.
Very interesting.
And important that is done objectively and fairly.
Now, the Asian Development Bank has given, is it a loan? A total of $900 million for the Yolanda victims to redevelop the Yolanda-stricken areas. Am I correct?
Correct.
Was this a grant or a loan?
Right. It's a combination.
Okay.
Much of it, Philippines being a low middle-income country, is in the form of a budget support that the country can use, including for the Yolanda situation, and that's about $500 million. And that, of course, eventually will be repaid by the conditions of ADB's lending. Plus another loan for communities, something like 372, plus a grant element, and the loan for technical assistance, and one from Japan, JICA as well.
You know, critics have always asked, even Secretary Ping Lacson, where did all the money go? There's been so much foreign money coming in for assistance with Yolanda. Are you able to find out this early on where the $900 million, or at least half of it, was spent by the Philippine government?
Right. Just on the procedures of actually releasing the money, not quite the impact side is on the way, in the sense that right now there has been a Ray 1, the first phase of Yolanda, reconstruction assistance for Yolanda, and we're going into the second phase, and the operational side of the Asian Development Bank will be looking at how well have things gone.
So you don't have that yet. How well have those things
in
gone?
the coming weeks?
Yes.
Right, very soon in the coming weeks we'll have a first glimpse of that.
Yeah.
But the early indications would be, I would say, that in the very first phase, the money mobilized was impressive. The approach to getting the partnerships going was impressive, and the relief side. So there are three phases of the whole response. One is the relief, then there's a rehabilitation or recovery, and then there's a reconstruction. So we need to go from 1 to 2 to 3 quickly, and so high marks on the early phase of getting the support, and now the capacity to do the reconstruction and the use of the money and its distribution, those are challenges.
Now, being a foreigner in this country, and you've experienced reconstruction in Aceh, for example, you've seen it firsthand. Even in other areas, I think even rebuilding in Bangladesh, many homes, the ADB was at the forefront. Are you satisfied in terms of the timetable in the way the Philippines is rehabilitating and reconstructing Yolanda-stricken areas? Because Filipinos tend to be very impatient. Government is slow, I'm not seeing anything. And yet when you compare to Aceh, they say we're right on track. As an independent evaluator, where are we exactly?
Yeah, of course, this is the evaluation that we need to do, but let me make a couple of comments. Aceh is cited as a good case where a lot of money was put together, but building back better was a serious agenda.
In Aceh?
In Aceh, for emergency shelters, of 8 of them in that region put together in a very impressive way. So they turned a crisis into an opportunity.
Aceh.
Of working together. So I think it's cited, but of course there are always shortcomings in everywhere.
Of course.
But in the case of Yolanda and this, the capacity to implement as well as the speed with which the money is going to be used will be a continuing challenge, but it needs to be addressed. But let me say one thing. When it's an emergency, it is important to move fast, but it's also important to move well. You go into an emergency room and you have a big crisis. Yes, the actions have to be quick in treating the patient, but you also have to keep the protocol so that the follow-up is just as good.
True.
So it is not the case that if it's an emergency, all bets are off and you go wild, but you do it systematically. So I think the time it takes to build consensus and do it right has its value, but you need to move fast as well. So that combination is really what is at
Because
issue.
there's been a lot of feedback in recent months that many of the residents in Tacloban, for example, are still in transitional housing. They're not even in bunk houses. No, they're in emergency housing intents. And some critics have said it's taken too long. That's why I wanted to ask you, in terms of your international experience, is this too long? Or I don't know where we are in terms of how the world reacts to crisis.
Right. I think as I'm signaled earlier, but it's an assessment that needs to be done, and we will see that in the coming weeks. But many positives in terms of the mobilization of the resources, and given this top priority, it's a big issue for the country, it's a crisis. At the same time, the 3 areas that now really can be, but needs to be addressed with urgency would be the resettlement. And how to resettle. It's a reality. Resettlement with livelihoods of people in mind. Sri Lanka had an experience of trying to move people away from the harm's way. Good, but what happened to their livelihoods? They were fisher folks. So you have to balance the two. So resettlement
So that was unsuccessful.
That would be mixed. Successful in one sense, but then the livelihoods part didn't go quite well, so the people had to come back and then you arrange a part of it at least. So resettlement is one. The other, as you said, Karen, housing. That is probably half of the financing needs that need to go into housing finance, and I would say after that would be the business finance. These 3 are the elements on which partners are working. The government is working, Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, AID. These are all agencies that are involved. So these 3 parts, resettlement, housing finance, and the business finance need to move forward.
All right. Now, in your recent study, we'd like to show you, Direk, if you're ready, a map
Yes.
This was a map of, it was the route, is that correct?
That's right.
This is the route of Yolanda.
Yes.
So that it's been a year, I think. Has it been a year?
We'll have the anniversary in November.
Okay, almost a year anniversary in November. So the orange is Yolanda.
Right, the orange is a path of Yolanda, and you can see, let me just point out, we wonder, is the Philippines most vulnerable to these sort of things? By various indicators, Philippines is among the top 10 when it comes to vulnerability, but it's not the only country. Many countries are facing it, and with climate change, it's kind of an equalizer. Industrial countries or developed countries are facing the challenge just like the developing countries. But that said, in that path of Yolanda, you can see 3 or 4 reasons that contribute to Philippines' vulnerability, somewhat differently or more than in many other cases.
So what are the 4 in the
Number
Philippines?
1, the ocean water warming. Right in the Philippines, right around the area, is an observation that we have, number 1. Number 2...
So the ocean water warming is most prevalent in the Philippines only?
Well, it's not that as much as to say that ocean waters are warming. Philippines happens to have 35,000 kilometers of coastal line. So you have a combination that renders vulnerability. And of course, to add to that, the path of a typhoon is unfettered in a way. There are no mountains to stop it.
That's true.
Hits us first before it hits anyone else. So,
other countries do.
Yes, absolutely. On the Pacific Islands, there are so many countries who are in the same situation. But
they have mountains.
Well, many don't.
Okay.
So Philippines is not the only one.
Go ahead, water.
But now, number 2, very important, with the 35,000 kilometers of coastal line, the second thing is some 70% of the people live close to that. For various reasons, economic activity, population increase, space to move, and so that adds to the first problem, first issue, right? That you are locating in harm's way, which of course can be addressed with further planning and zoning and so on. And number 3, a problem in every country, unfortunately, there were natural resistance to storms that was God-given, but we have taken them away. Deforestation, soil erosion, and so environmental protection, which somehow people may have thought of as a luxury, is the most basic thing to keep growth going. It is not at odds with growth, but if we want to grow at 7% for the next, and one projection says, yes,
you mean the Philippines?
Philippines can say 6%, 7%. Will it happen? It can happen, but the environmental and climate actions are really an ingredient to making them happen, not take away. So this message would be to the finance ministers of the world more than the environmental ministers.
Okay, have some water first. So you were saying there are 4 reasons that make the Philippines most vulnerable. 35,000 kilometers of ocean, so that's the ocean water warming. And you said end-use problems, deforestation, soil erosion.
And one more.
What are the others?
So let me add the 4th, which is again a problem everywhere. When you think about the impact of climate change in our study, we found 3 reasons. One is the exposure of the people to the problem. How are you located in the way of harm? So that was the first point. The second thing, which is the 4th point here, is that vulnerability or the capacity of people to cope, which is connected to poverty. It's not just a poverty issue, but when something happens, are you ready to move? And so the early warning and the capacity of the people to, again, at the end of the day, rebuild and all that, that limits and makes a hazard into a disaster if not addressed well. So that would be the 4th factors: the ocean warming of the water, the location of 70% along the path, and the deforestation, plus the vulnerability of people to deal with the problem.
Okay. Now, there's a Climate Vulnerability Index in 2014. Can we show that graphics? It's quite interesting. Where in Bangladesh is number 1 as being the most vulnerable in 2014, and the Philippines ranks number 9. Can we show that, please? Okay. The Philippines ranks number 9. Okay. All right. So let me show this. It's right here. Okay. No, I think this is prepared, Andy. Can you ask Ethel, please? They prepared this. So this one, I've noticed that in the Climate Vulnerability Index, most of the countries are relatively poorer countries. Why is that?
Right.
Why are they the most vulnerable? Is it in terms of location?
Right.
But then you have South Sudan, you have Ethiopia, you have the Congo.
Let me say first that there are many indicators of this, and actually in this one, Philippines is ranked 9. I've seen some where Philippines is ranked 3. I chose the one that ranked Philippines 9.
No, but for example, we're right beside Hong Kong. Why is it Hong Kong like in the list?
Right.
So what is the measure that makes you vulnerable? It struck me that a lot of them are poorer countries.
Right. So this connects with the 3 reasons why a hazard turns into a disaster. How exposed you are.
Yes.
So some countries are able to keep people away by the location. Number 2, the ability to withstand it even when it hits. How well are things built to be resilient?
How well are things built?
To be resilient.
Yes.
And when you build back, and I would say build back better, of course quicker, but safer as well. How well is that going?
So,
and then third, how much of a hazard are you facing? When you put the 3 together, Philippines has a capacity, so it's positive in many respects, but when you take the first and the third point, namely exposure, with a 70%...
No, infrastructure.
That's right. Well, that goes into the capacity to deal with it. When you put the 3 together, Philippines is one of the countries that are vulnerable. And let me say, East Asia, Southeast Asia, and Asia in general have received a disproportionate number of these events compared to the other regions. And one last thing, when you look at that, it's more the floods and the storms that have increased, not earthquakes and volcanoes, even though we know...
Why is that? Why are there more floods and storms?
So here is a point that I watch the weather reports every time, and they say this happened, that happened, but oftentimes this connection is not made, and it is still controversial. But in this paper, we looked at data for the last 50 years, and we have this hunch that aside from exposure, how are you located, vulnerability, how well you can withstand, the third factor is the changing climate. And so that affects floods and storms, not earthquakes and volcanoes. If you look at a map, you will see that over the last 40 years, volcanoes and earthquakes have been flat. Storms, floods, droughts, as well as heat waves are up. So the question is, how come? And it seems to have a relationship with climate change in the sense that the CO2, the carbon atmosphere concentration has been going clearly up. Temperatures have been going clearly up. In the Philippines, we count the number of hot days and the number of cold days. Very different today than the past. They are up in hot days and down in cold days. So this makes the storms more, contributes to the storm's path and intensity. So the third factor would seem to be, in addition to exposure and vulnerability, climate change, and that has to be addressed. Of course, addressing the climate change is not a Philippine problem only. Well, Philippines contributes perhaps 1% to the global footprint. The big players have to act with a sense of urgency, but Philippines also would need to do more on the adaptation side. The funds that we talked about, ACHE, building back better, safer and quicker would be an agenda for the adaptation side. We need mitigation also.
Okay. Now, I was going to ask you, given that climate change is a big factor, there are more storms, more floods, I've noticed that our Asian neighbors are not in the most vulnerable top 10 list. Could it be because they have better infrastructure? Because of that, they have better capacity? Because I've spoken to a few foreigners who visit the country, and they say they love the Philippines. They love the people, but poor infrastructure. Always, of course, when you travel, it's something that you can't not see. So I want to ask you that. How important is it for the Philippines not just to spend on infrastructure, but really take it to a level that it is world class?
First of all, there is another graph that we had, which is to show Manila along with the others, and you will see
as most at risk.
It will be striking to see that in the top 10, I don't know if they have the 10 there, but in any case, the top 10, you have Dhaka, Mumbai, Manila, Kolkata, Bangkok, Ho Chi Minh, Delhi, Dhaka, Bangladesh. So we're looking at 7. All 7 are in the top 7 in the world. So it's not just Manila.
In Asia.
They're all in Asia. All the 7 are in Asia. Now again, many different indexes, there can be differences, but the basic point does come through that when it comes to cities, not the country, then Manila is not the only one. There are other Asian cities, so that says that some commonalities exist among these countries in terms of exposure, vulnerability, and the intensity of the storm. But then I would say infrastructure is an important part, but I want to emphasize it's only one element. Philippines and other countries who are spending a certain percentage, whether it is 3 or 4% of GDP on infrastructure, could rightly increase that, because that's essential. And the funding for infrastructure, interestingly, may be increasing. ADB, of course, does quite a lot. Some 70% of the lending would be for infrastructure. And there are also new players in the bloc who can provide infrastructure financing.
But
that's not enough.
Yes, okay, that's not enough. Now, is infrastructure, of course it is the solution, but is it the only solution? Because what has happened, for example, in the Philippines is there's been a lot of deforestation, soil erosion. You're talking about years and years of illegal logging. Even if today the awareness for environmental protection is quite high, I mean, it's a bit late, some people feel.
I want to
we've become like a cement jungle. There are barely even trees in the city.
I want to stress that point very much. Infrastructure is a necessary condition, but not a sufficient condition. And it really needs to be combined with social sector spending, awareness, just simply education programs, and we have many examples where education from an early age on the value of the environment makes a huge difference. All of those are important to bring the benefits of the infrastructure. Actually, there is a study from the IMF that just came out which says exactly that just having infrastructure projects by themselves won't do it. It's not a panacea, but blending it with these other things can make a difference, and we've looked at that where infrastructure was combined with education, health, etc. The combination worked. So the points that you mentioned on illegal logging and so on, I must say, historically there has been a thinking that dealing with some of these issues is a long-term thing, and its benefits come many, many years later. The other thing is, if it's climate change, if I did something, it benefits somebody else, so I'm not going to do much. And number 3, and most important, is a message to the finance ministers of the world. Environment, mistakenly people think, is a pain on growth. It blocks growth. The relationship is today unquestionably the other way around. If we don't deal with the environment, from the parks and the trees that you mentioned to making a low carbon path possible, good energy, renewable energy, clean energy, etc. If we didn't do that, all bets are off as far as growth is concerned. It will be difficult for Asia to grow at 6% for the next 50 years without giving top priority to the environment and climate change and all the social community support that you need to make that happen. So environment is not a cost to growth. It's the only way we can grow.
Okay, all right. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. All right, welcome back to Hot Copy. Still with us is Vinod Thomas, Director General of Independent Evaluation at the Asian Development Bank. In 2015, the Philippines will be experiencing a power crisis. The President wants emergency powers. Now, in relation to climate change, the easiest to contract is usually a coal plant. It's the fastest to build, it's the cheapest, and yet coal plants are part of the problem with climate change. Your opinion on this? What should the President do?
Well, first of all, yes, fossil fuels is a clear problem when it comes to climate change, and switching to cleaner coal, but also to renewables and other sources will be critical when we talk of preventing the worst case scenarios. Now, it is a challenge in the sense that immediately in the very short term you could produce some figures showing that the use of coal gives you lower cost energy than the use of renewables, whether solar, wind and so on. However, that is a false comparison. certainly for the world, in that when you talk about coal, the cost of coal, we are not taking into account the damage it causes to the rest of the people. So if I'm in a household and I do great, but I harm the neighbor, that cost should be taken into account. Taking into account that...
But shouldn't rich countries pay attention to that? That's always... Because if the Philippines is 1% of the carbon footprint...
Right.
I mean...
That's right.
Okay.
Absolutely, this is a risk. But I think here it's a problem for all of us.
Yeah.
We need to move... So you can have super clean coal for a while, but increasingly switch to renewables, whose costs, interestingly, are coming down relative to coal.
Give me an example of renewable that is popular in the world that can go at par with coal.
Well, I can say a combination of things. First of all, when it comes to energy, improving the efficiency of energy use could be a single big contributor to cleaner air. So there, it's a matter of improving the efficiency of use and avoiding leakages and so on, pilferage and all the rest. So that's a big ticket item. Then I think more controversial, well, if you're staying with coal, please switch to cleaner forms of coal. And
there's a cleaner form of coal.
Yes, but it is controversial because by doing that, you may be inadvertently encouraging coal, period. You need to say fossil fuels have to be phased out from the energy equation over time in the interest of growth, not in the interest of making some people happy. But there will be lobbies against that because they have vested interest in keeping the coal. And this is an issue for the United States, an issue for developed countries as well.
I'm curious, does the ADB fund power in the Philippines?
Well, ADB is the biggest, the biggest part of its portfolio is energy. And for the Philippines, I would say the top three would be energy, public sector management, and agriculture.
Now, does the ADB fund coal?
Certainly not dirty coal. ADB is, in a sense, at the cutting edge of going for renewable energy in quite an impressive way. 2 billion of the lending, not just to the Philippines, all around, would be for renewables, and that needs to be encouraged, particularly as the coal prices and the price of renewables, that gap is coming down. So would
the ADB then would be open to lending for renewables again?
Not just open.
It is.
It is an incredibly important part of ADB's strategy. I think ADB is at the frontier, and as we talk about infrastructure, just to build and rebuild like we did before on the old paradigm that this is good for growth won't take us very far.
Now,
and ADB
does the president need emergency powers?
Well, I think always it's best to build it into the institutional structure of the organization so it's sustainable. You know, when we have emergency actions and so on, the question would be what happens later. So I think generally speaking, in a democracy, certainly, but in any country, building it into the institutional fabric so that encouragement to the use of clean energy is part of the agenda. And Philippines could be on the frontier. You know, it has a large percentage coming from coal in its energy use, but it also has other sources that are cleaner, and change that gap between the two dramatically as we go forward. Not only in the interest of the rest of the world, but I would say really in the interest of the Philippines. And there I would add the deforestation issue as a big ticket item. You know, maybe 20% of the problem of CO2, that forests can be a great carbon sink. And if that can be used, and in this case Philippines and the developing countries have the greatest potential, it would be wonderful. So there is a path that is good for growth and good for the environment.
Okay, all right. We have 2 minutes to go, but I wanted to close also showing our last graphics. This is, can you show this? This is, it's very practical, the last one. It's successful evacuation first by students in Japan, in East Japan, and Achi's Tsunami Escape Tower, which would mean, this would give you examples of successful adaptation. Can we show that? All right, okay. So for example, this one. This is what, you can't stop it, but then you are able to adapt to it. Okay, talk about this one. So in Japan in 2011.
So this makes 2 points. One is that the prevention side, or preparing ahead of time, including what I will call soft areas like education, is critical. So the kids in the school have learned this over the years, that is very important. But what was extraordinary
because we don't think of that much in the Philippines. It should be embedded
in the DNA of the children.
I like that. It's in the DNA.
They think about it day in and day out, and they reacted in a way that was extraordinary. Not only did they follow the protocols that they learned, they went further and moved to a higher plane than the normal drills would have shown, because the disaster was so great. So the kids were the leaders, but based on some education on that.
So education is important, and that disaster preparedness should be in your DNA. The last one is a good example for Typhoon Yolanda-stricken areas. This is Aceh's Tsunami Escape Tower. Okay, can we show that as the last graphics? This is building it better, building it smarter, that we can do in the Visayas, in the Yolanda areas. Okay, so give an example. After that,
Aceh had many issues and there are many challenges, but in terms of building back better, this is a good example that you could plan for emergency shelters that are proof. You know, they should have.
So these are 4 floors of emergency shelters. If there's a storm, there's a tsunami, everybody runs there.
That's right. And this is not the only one. There are 8 of these in that area. 8 of these have been done. So this is a very interesting success case. And
do they use it for other? I mean, if that were in the Philippines, I'm curious. They might use it for like parties, or do they use it, or no, they don't?
That's right. I think they should be year-round available. That will be the principle. There should be no excuse that we are having a party right now. We can't use it for emergency shelter.
Yes. And the 2 floors under, that if you can show it, are actually for the water to come in. Look at it. They're open.
That's right.
The first 2 floors is for the flooding to come through it.
So there is escape to a higher plane.
Okay.
Yes.
That's very interesting. How much did this cost? ADB funded this, by the way.
Well, the exact cost of this I'm not sure, but let me just say, building in these things is a small percentage of the total cost. Adding the adaptation element could be about 10% more cost, but it is essential to avoid a 90% increase in that damage.
Yes.
One last thing on that, this prevention side, you know, firefighters, they spend 5% of the time fighting fire, 95% doing that kind of thing. So the emphasis on prevention, especially now that we know this is systematic, it comes year after year, not necessarily every year. We did an examination, you know, in a worst case scenario, you could have one extra disaster every 3 years, but even that is enough to derail people's lives, right? So it's very important. So, yes, we should mop the floor when the tap is running, but we got to turn off the tap too.
That's true. All right. So building back better, building back smarter is the key. Thank you very much, Vinod, for coming to the show. And I do hope that, I like what you said, disaster preparedness should be in our DNA. Okay, that's important. Thank you.
Maraming salamat.
Maraming salamat. Thank you. Replay of this interview at 6 p.m. tonight. Weekend replay as well. That's Headstart today. Very good points this morning. Have a good day, everyone, and enjoy your weekend.